power never disappears, it merely changes hands. When the French Revolution shattered the absolute monarchies of Europe, a vast political vacuum opened. From that chaos rose one extraordinary general, a man whose genius and ambition would not only command armies, but redesign the political landscape of an entire continent. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and when his empire finally collapsed, Europe's rulers gathered in Vienna, determined to rebuild what he had torn apart. The true conflict was never just fought on the battlefield, but in the struggle to define Europe's future, revolution versus restoration. Napoleon began as a champion of the revolution, yet soon became its imperial master. When he crowned himself, he embodied a new idea, power earned through merit, not bestowed by divine right. Where his armies marched, the old order crumbled. Feudal privileges were swept aside. Ancient laws were replaced by the Napoleonic Code, a modern legal system built on equality before the law, protection of property, and advancement based on ability.
I found the crown of France lying in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword.
For millions across Europe, this was a shock. Societies governed for centuries by hereditary privilege suddenly faced a world where talent mattered more than birth.
I reward ability, not titles.
But Napoleon's greatest legacy was one he never intended: nationalism. As he conquered territories, he unknowingly awakened a sense of shared identity among the people he ruled. Italians, Germans, Spaniards all began to imagine themselves as nations capable of governing their own destinies. Yet even brilliance has limits. In 1812, the Russian winter consumed his grand army. Europe united against him, and after Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon fell for the last time, leaving behind a continent transformed and deeply unstable. After 20 years of war, Europe needed order. The great powers, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, and even France, met in Vienna to rebuild the continent. At the center stood Clemens von Metternich, a master diplomat and fierce defender of the old order.
Our task is not to seize trophies, but to restore the world to peaceful habits.
Metternich sought to reverse the revolutionary tide.
Revolutions spread like fire. We must smother the embers and protect the thrones.
The Congress restored overthrown monarchs through the principle of legitimacy, redrew the map of Europe to create a balance of power, and built the Concert of Europe, a system to preserve stability and suppress liberal and nationalist uprisings. Vienna was not merely diplomacy, but it was diplomacy wrapped in spectacle.
The Congress of Vienna does not walk, it dances.
Censorship tightened. Political speech was restricted. Revolutions were crushed before they could grow. Yet remarkably, the system worked. From 1815 until the outbreak of World War I, Europe avoided any major continent-wide war. Napoleon and the Congress of Vienna shaped the modern world through their opposition. Napoleon's conquests planted the seeds of self-rule, equality before the law, and national identity. Vienna tried to bury those ideas, restoring monarchs and tightening conservative control. But Metternich could only redraw borders. He could not erase the ideals Napoleon had unleashed. Beneath Vienna's polished surface, nationalism and liberalism simmered. Within a few decades, they erupted in the revolutions of 1848. Italy unified, Germany rose under Prussian leadership, and the great multi-ethnic empires, Austria and the Ottomans, began to crack under the weight of the very identities Napoleon had awakened. Europe entered a long peace, but it was an uneasy peace, built atop shifting ground, destined to fracture. Napoleon reshaped Europe through conquest and law. Vienna reshaped it through diplomacy and control. Between these two forces, the foundations of the modern political world were laid. Their shared legacy is a Europe forever caught between tradition and transformation, calm on the surface, yet never truly settled. Histoscript, where standards become stories. History remembers Napoleon through battles, borders, and laws, but some of the most powerful judgments of him were not written in books. They were written in music. From the concert halls of Vienna to the Orthodox churches of Moscow, composers used symphonies, marches, and even cannons to say exactly what they believed Napoleon represented. To some, he was a hero. To others, a tyrant. To Russia, the Antichrist. If Vienna tried to shape the political memory of Napoleon, music tried to shape the emotional one, and sometimes the emotional memory is the one that lasts. This is the story of Napoleon, told by the music he inspired. Before Napoleon crowned himself emperor, he was admired across Europe as the great hope of the Enlightenment, a liberator, a breaker of chains, the enemy of monarchy. No one believed this more deeply than Ludwig van Beethoven. In 1803, Beethoven wrote a symphony unlike any ever composed, monumental, heroic, revolutionary. He dedicated it to Napoleon, the man he believed would remake Europe in the image of freedom. The first movement charges forward with unstoppable energy. The funeral march mourns the death of tyranny, and the finale erupts with triumphant hope. This was Beethoven's musical tribute to a world without kings. But then, Napoleon crowned himself emperor. Beethoven's assistant wrote that the composer tore the title page in rage, shouting, "Now he will trample the rights of man." In that moment, Napoleon changed in Beethoven's eyes from hero to betrayer of the revolution. Years later, Beethoven composed another piece about Napoleon, but this one was no tribute. Wellington's Victory, written in 1813, celebrated Napoleon's defeat in Spain. Instead of heroic themes, Beethoven filled the music with theatrical battle sounds, marching drums, musket fire, and clashing orchestras. This was not admiration, this was mockery, a musical victory parade celebrating Napoleon's downfall. Beethoven had come full circle. Napoleon the Liberator had become Napoleon the Tyrant. But nowhere was Napoleon judged more harshly than in Russia. In 1812, as French forces burned villages, destroyed churches, and marched on Moscow, Russians searched for ways to explain such devastation. In Tolstoy's War and Peace, characters describe Napoleon not simply as a conqueror, but as the Antichrist, a man of overwhelming ego who threatened the spiritual order of the world. Tolstoy portrays ordinary Russians who saw Napoleon as a godless force, a living omen of apocalypse, the embodiment of pride before destruction. Decades later, Tchaikovsky transformed this same national memory into one of the most dramatic musical works ever written, the 1812 Overture. It begins with a Russian Orthodox hymn, a plea for divine protection. Then suddenly, the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, intrudes like an invading army. The two themes clash violently. Cannons explode, the music collapses into chaos. Finally, the Russian hymn rises again, joined by thunderous church bells that crush the French melody beneath them. It is not just musical storytelling, it is spiritual triumph. In sound, Tchaikovsky expresses what Tolstoy wrote in words. Napoleon was the force Russia had to overcome, not only militarily, but morally. To Russia, he was not the hero of liberty. He was a proud conqueror who defied God and fell. Two composers, two nations, three Napoleons. To early Beethoven, he was a heroic liberator. To later Beethoven, he became a fallen tyrant. To Tchaikovsky and to Tolstoy, he was a destructive force, a threat to the soul of Russia itself. Napoleon's legacy is not just political, it is emotional, it is cultural. It echoes in symphonies, overtures, and national memory. Music reveals a deeper truth. The world didn't just fight Napoleon, it argued about him. Napoleon reshaped Europe through force. Music reshaped him through memory. Whether hero or monster, savior or antichrist, Napoleon inspired some of the greatest composers in history to judge him, through sound, through emotion, through art. Long after the battles have faded, the music still plays. Napoleon lost on the battlefield, but in a strange way he won in history. Europe spent decades trying to undo him, restoring kings, silencing reformers, and returning to the old order. But the world didn't stay restored. In the long run, Europe moved toward the ideas Napoleon championed, not away from them. Merit over birthright, law over privilege, nations shaped by citizens, not dynasties. The very monarchies that feared his reforms eventually adopted them, and the world that condemned him for challenging tradition now takes those challenges for granted. Maybe Napoleon was ahead of his time. Maybe the Europe he imagined, a Europe driven by talent, ambition, and national identity, didn't appear in 1815, but in 1848, in 1871, and in the centuries that followed. Today, we expect opportunities to be earned, not inherited. We expect laws to apply to everyone. We expect nations to be defined by people, not by rulers. In the end, the kings beat Napoleon, but his ideas beat the kings. And that's why his story still matters, because the world we live in looks far more like Napoleon's blueprint than the world that tried to erase him.
Thanks for watching Histoscript. If you learned something new today, or just love the hidden side of history, give this video a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story your textbook skipped. History isn't just dates, it's secrets, myths, and the strange truths behind it all. Stay curious. Stay tuned.